Hey, what's cracking, lucky people? So, it seems like forever since I fired out a video, and it's mostly because I had a somewhat hellish 2 weeks with two notable occasions. One where my mobile phone broke, and I was really getting into putting my games collection on Instagram too. So if you can see my Instagram link on my YouTube channel, have a look, because I'm slowly building up my photos on there of my collection. And the other part was where I was pretty ill with the flu. Which in some ways I still haven't fully recovered from yet. But I'm back, fresh from a Juices Loose podcast, which sowed some gaming discord, and now ready for a new discussion. One that I could have started many times during my gaming life if YouTube had been around then. But I feel that this is something we can all relate to. There comes a time, or many times in my gaming history, where you play that one experience which sets the benchmark not only for your likes as a gamer, but also for the industry to follow, or more accurately, you hope the industry follows, because it could surely only mean great things for the direction that games can and hopefully will go in. My fire for this was not simply rekindled, but set into a roaring inferno, after playing The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, a game that on my channel you should know how I feel about it by now. After playing Breath of the Wild, I fell into a gaming slump, one that I hadn't felt for years. That type of gaming slump where you just experience such greatness, greatness that comes so rarely in this industry, in my opinion, that everything else you play after it, no matter how good or refined, even Mario Odyssey refined, that everything just feels almost like a small step backwards, or sometimes a big step backwards. I mean, in the year of gaming where where Breath of the Wild released, many argued, even myself, that it was arguably the or one of the best years in gaming. This was 2017. We had some seriously stellar titles released, yet none of them, absolutely none of them, came close to Breath of the Wild for me. Why? Because for me, Breath of the Wild achieved more, way more than any other game has done since, and arguably before, although there are naturally a wealth of other industry-changing games that I can happily, I feel can happily stand toe-to-toe with Breath of the Wild for the period in time they were released. But because of Breath of the Wild, because of what it's done with its mechanics, its world, its sound, its execution of all its fundamentals, moving on to somewhat similar titles, or even some drastically different ones, left a desire and want to have similar mechanics executed, as well in these other titles. Basically, it just left me simply wanting more. I'm currently playing through Rise of the Tomb Raider at the moment, a game that's in my PS4 backlog, amongst others. And although it's not a bad game, it conjures up the same feelings that I had with the first reboot. A game I heavily, but not intentionally, used in one of my earlier videos to try and highlight gameplay mechanics that that once were, but exist very little now in many AAA titles. I'll fire a link above if you fancy watching it at some point, if you haven't done so already. Playing Rise of the Tomb Raider once again brought up the greatness syndrome, which is what I'll title it for the fun of this conversation. Before I last logged off, I got to a puzzle room which required me to get a number of explosive barrels towards a central structure that was being precariously held by some wooden beams in some water. Now, the game was kind enough to have one of those explosive barrels next to the wooden structure at the start, so to basically show you what needs to be done. That this game does indeed have a lot of hand holding. But anyway, I blew up the barrel and the structure weakened, and Lara conveniently tells me that I need a few more to bring it down. Now, now suffering from greatness syndrome, I remember that Lara had explosive arrows for her bow, which she used mere moments before to blow through some large wooden doors. So my brain is like, fuck the barrels. I'll blow up the structures with my arrows because hey, they are bound to do the same job, right?
Wrong.
Well, no. No, they didn't. The arrows didn't even bounce off the structure. They just disappeared into that gaming code void, that happens in video games when things just disappear. It's almost like the game was unable to comprehend what I was trying to do, or hoping to easily achieve. It's moments like this in many AAA games where you once again realize that underneath all the glitz and glamour is in fact a somewhat shallow experience. Okay, let me take that back. Not perhaps so much a shallow experience, just one that is rigid in what it allows the player to do. Even though the developers, provide the player with these tools, but ultimately restrict them to certain more sparse situations. Something the Tomb Raider reboots are rife with, and of course you can look at this in many lights and decide whether it's good or bad. But after playing Greatness, that seamlessly offers these such things. So I play through. As I play through Tomb Raider, I'm constantly reminded of what could have easily been, and lament many times through the experience as I encounter such things. And not just Rise of the Tomb Raider, but if you watch my other video, I name a number of other titles and could easily name more if so be. If you go through history, we've had the same thing with many titles that hold the greatness card, as I call it. Mario 64 as an obvious example, which if you had played first or even second back then, and then go back to something like Trash Bandicoot, it's literally night and day in terms of impact and greatness, as we know. Mario 64 set the template after that, not Crash Bandicoot, which thankfully had little to no clones afterwards. And Mario 64 remained and still remains for many that one game where if you're going to do a 3D platformer, it has to be Mario 64 level, or it'll not necessarily fall flat. Because I'd like to stress that not every game can be God tier or Mario 64 tier. But then at the same time, as fun as other games might be, they'll always stand in the shadow of Mario 64's greatness, leaving and wanting and begging for that next game that surpasses Mario 64. And as we debate all the time, not even Mario Sunshine for many people topped Mario 64. Or I'll happily stand in a Mario Sunshine was a great game camp, not as good as Mario 64, but still a great game. And for many people, they felt like they had to wait until Super Mario Galaxy on the Nintendo Wii before feeling satisfied again that a 3D platformer had reached Mario 64 level of caliber. For many of us, there are simply some games that have remained the apex for years. Is Link to the Past not only the best top-down Zelda, but still the best top-down adventure of its kind? That's a debate, that's an argument. Super Metroid, still for most remains the best Metroid game and Metroid style of title. And sticking with Metroid, I personally consider the Metroid Prime trilogy to arguably be the best trilogy in gaming. But as much as I love Metroid Prime 2 and 3, coming off from the Crom tier greatness That was Metroid Prime 1. The other titles were in some ways destined to not shine as bright, but I do feel that Prime 4 could change this. For me, Final Fantasy VI is still the best Final Fantasy, with 7 coming the closest to topping it. But also for me, in terms of JRPGs and turn-based battles of that kind, nothing has topped Panzer Dragoon Saga, a game that released a mere year after Final Fantasy VII, and in my opinion, just blew it out of the water in all departments. F-Zero GX is still not only the best F-Zero game in my opinion, but it's still the best futuristic racer there is. World of Warcraft has been untouchable in the MMO space, for me especially, with everything that game achieved. For me, no other Halo game has topped the impact and awesomeness of the very first game, Combat Evolved, at least single player wise, and to think of how many Halo games, Halo titles that there have been now. All great games in their own right. Unless you keep talking to me, and I'll chew the crap out of the entire series after the first game. But there are simply those games that are so good, made such an impact, set so many templates. Everything else after them just falls in their shadows of greatness and struggle to get out. Those other games can be great, exceptional even, but after you've already been spoiled, man, it's difficult. And of course there are those games that truly shake up the industry. The latest for me being Breath of the Wild. I talked about this recently. Do I want everything that Breath of the Wild offers to appear in every game? No. Of course not. There are many elements that simply would not make any sense for a given title. But for those titles that do fit the bill, yes, there are certainly elements that I'd like to see implemented a lot going forwards, because that's what games should be doing for the most part. Moving forwards, not sitting still for too long, learning and mastering the past so that the future offers more engaging and compelling pieces of software that keeps this medium as wonderful and creative as it can be. And anyway, I think I'm done here. Let me know your own thoughts. Of course, what games from the past or the present have spoiled you. Quite preferably the present, just so we could talk more recent. But I'll fully understand, as I explained earlier, some of those games that still got released 20 years ago, and for many have just not been topped, and you have to ask yourself why. I suppose these games haven't been topped, and once again, that's another great thing to add into the comments if you decide to comment and explain why you feel some great titles have still yet to be surpassed and leave you longing when you play a certain game in the same genre, leave you just wondering why this newer game isn't doing the same or better than what the older game done. Like I said, you get left spoiled, and it leaves you feeling slightly unfulfilled with the next game you played because of that greatness you had experienced before, which for me right now is Breath of the Wild and some games I'm playing, like I said, Rise of the Tomb Raider, and a few other titles I'm dabbling with at the moment. But anyway, as always, thanks for listening, and please leave your comments below. And like I said, I always reply to every single person's comment. I do try to make the effort, and I do very much look forward to your comments below. And as always, peace.